Today we are looking at an important discussion surrounding the Iraqi dinar and a topic that has generated significant attention among currency watchers, the possibility of removing zeros from the Iraqi currency. But there is a critical distinction that every dinar follower needs to understand before interpreting this kind of news. Removing zeros from a currency is not automatically the same thing as increasing the currency's real economic value. These are two different monetary concepts, and understanding the difference is essential for evaluating what any future Iraqi currency reform could actually mean. The discussion comes from an educational analysis that brings the idea of deleting zeros back into focus. The article describes removing zeros as a possible renaming or redenomination of the currency, while separately discussing an increase in the real value of the dinar through broader economic and exchange rate factors. That distinction may sound technical, but it is extremely important because currency reform can affect the way numbers are displayed without necessarily changing the underlying purchasing power of the people holding that currency. Let's begin with the concept of redenomination. When economists talk about removing zeros, they generally mean changing the denomination structure of the currency. For example, if a country decided to remove 3 zeros, a banknote representing 25,000 units under the old system could potentially become a 25-unit note under the new system, depending on the exact rules established by the monetary authorities. Prices, wages, bank balances, contracts, accounting systems, and other financial figures would also have to be converted according to the same ratio. The important point is that this process by itself does not create wealth. If everything is converted proportionally, the purchasing power of the individual does not automatically increase, simply because the number printed on the banknote has changed. A person who previously had 25,000 dinars might have a smaller-looking number after redenomination, but if prices and other financial values are converted at the same ratio, the economic position of that person remains essentially unchanged. This is why the statement that removing 3 zeros does not automatically make citizens wealthier is so important. It helps separate the appearance of a stronger currency from an actual improvement in purchasing power. A currency can have fewer zeros and still represent essentially the same economic value in real terms. Now we need to examine the second concept, increasing the real value of the Iraqi dinar. That is a much broader economic question. The value of a currency is influenced by factors such as inflation, productivity, interest rates, trade flows, foreign exchange reserves, monetary policy, fiscal policy, investor confidence, and the overall strength of the economy. One analytical framework that can be used when discussing competitiveness and currency valuation is the real effective exchange rate, commonly known as the REER. The REER does not simply mean that a central bank announces a higher exchange rate and everyone becomes richer overnight. Instead, it is a measure used to assess a currency's value relative to the currencies of major trading partners, while also taking relative price levels into consideration. It can help economists evaluate whether a currency is relatively strong or weak compared with the economies it trades with. For Iraqi dinar followers, this distinction is extremely valuable. When you hear discussion about deleting zeros, it should not automatically be interpreted as evidence that the dinar is about to dramatically increase in value against the US dollar. A redenomination could be a currency management and accounting reform, while a genuine increase in purchasing power would depend on underlying economic conditions and monetary policy. So what does this latest discussion actually tell us? First, it demonstrates that currency reform remains an important subject in discussions about Iraq's monetary future. The fact that deletion of zeros is being discussed as an educational economic concept means the subject continues to attract attention. However, discussion should not be confused with an official implementation decision. For a major currency reform to become reality, the relevant Iraqi authorities would need to establish a formal policy framework, determine the conversion ratio, prepare the banking system, communicate with businesses and citizens, update accounting and payment infrastructure, and establish clear rules governing old and new currency. That preparation would be particularly important for Iraq because of the size and complexity of its economy. A currency redenomination affects far more than banknotes. Commercial banks would have to adjust their systems. Government accounting would need to be converted. Businesses would need to update prices and financial records. ATMs, electronic payments, contracts, and tax systems could all require changes. Public education would also be essential to prevent confusion and reduce the risk of fraud during the transition. In the short term, therefore, simply hearing that zero deletion is being discussed should not lead investors or currency holders to assume that an immediate exchange rate transformation has occurred. Until an official policy is announced and implemented, the existing exchange rate framework remains the key reference point. There is also another important issue: inflation and confidence. Redenomination works best when it is supported by sound monetary and fiscal conditions. If a country removes zeros but continues to experience substantial inflation or monetary instability, the cosmetic benefit of smaller denominations can quickly disappear. That is why successful currency reform normally has to be supported by broader economic management. For Iraq, long-term monetary credibility can be strengthened through banking sector modernization, stronger financial regulation, improved payment systems, better fiscal management, economic diversification, and greater confidence in the domestic financial system. These factors matter because a currency's long-term strength is ultimately connected to the economic system supporting it. This brings us to the question many Iraqi dinar followers are asking: could removing zeros eventually be connected with a stronger dinar? The answer is that the two concepts can exist within the same broader currency reform strategy, but one does not automatically cause the other. A country could redenominate its currency without significantly changing its real purchasing power. Alternatively, economic reforms and monetary policy changes could influence the real exchange value of a currency without requiring the government to remove zeros from banknotes. That is why it is important to watch official policy rather than relying on assumptions about what a future currency reform might mean. The short-term implication of this discussion is therefore primarily educational. It gives dinar followers a better framework for interpreting future headlines. If Iraqi authorities announce a redenomination proposal, viewers should immediately ask what the conversion ratio is, how prices will be converted, how bank deposits will be treated, what happens to existing banknotes, and whether the policy is accompanied by broader monetary reforms. The long-term implications are more significant. If Iraq continues strengthening its banking infrastructure, improving financial transparency, developing its private sector, increasing economic diversification, and maintaining monetary stability, those developments could provide a stronger foundation for the dinar over time. But those are gradual economic processes, not overnight events. It is also important to remember that Iraq's economy is heavily influenced by oil revenues. That creates both significant financial resources and vulnerabilities. Higher oil revenues can strengthen government finances and foreign exchange availability, while lower energy prices or disruptions can create pressure. For that reason, the long-term strength of the dinar cannot be evaluated through currency denominations alone. Investors and analysts must consider the broader Iraqi economy. Another point worth emphasizing is purchasing power. The real test of any currency is not simply how many zeros appear on a banknote. The more meaningful question is what that currency can actually purchase. If a person has fewer numerical units, but those units purchase the same amount of goods and services, then the person has not automatically become wealthier. Genuine improvement in living standards comes from stronger purchasing power, higher productivity, stable prices, better employment opportunities, and sustainable economic growth. That is the central lesson behind this latest discussion. For anyone following the Iraqi dinar, the responsible approach is to separate three different issues: denomination reform, exchange rate policy, and real economic purchasing power. They are connected, but they are not identical. Removing zeros is primarily a numerical and structural change. Changing the official exchange rate framework is a monetary policy decision. Increasing real purchasing power is ultimately tied to the performance and stability of the entire economy. So, as this discussion puts the deletion of zeros issue back on the table, the key takeaway is not that a major revaluation has been confirmed. Instead, the key takeaway is that currency reform remains a subject worth monitoring, and understanding the technical difference between redenomination and real appreciation will help dinar followers interpret future developments more accurately. If Iraq eventually moves toward a formal currency reform, the most important information will come from official announcements explaining exactly what is being proposed, how the conversion would work, and what economic objectives the reform is designed to achieve. Until then, Headlines and speculation should be treated carefully. The Iraqi dinar remains an important part of Iraq's financial system, and its future will ultimately depend on monetary policy, fiscal discipline, banking reforms, economic growth, investor confidence, and the country's ability to build a more diversified and productive economy. Currency reform can support efficiency and simplify financial transactions, but it cannot replace the fundamental economic reforms required to create sustainable prosperity. That is why today's discussion is useful. It does not prove that a dramatic exchange rate change is imminent, and it should not be interpreted as a guaranteed prediction about the future value of the Iraqi dinar. Instead, it provides a clearer way to understand one of the most frequently misunderstood subjects in Iraqi currency discussions. As always, keep your focus on verified information, official statements, and measurable economic developments. If you found this analysis useful, make sure to subscribe to Iraqi Dinar News and like the video for more responsible and factual updates on the Iraqi dinar, Iraq's economy, and important currency developments. Thank you for watching, stay informed, and remember that this content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not financial advice.